Hello, everybody. I'm going to welcome you to the new session of the day titled Open Streets 704, Connecting Communities Through Pavement. What we're going to talk about today is a movement that Mecklenburg County has initiated as of 2015, along with a lot of other agencies throughout the country. So before we get started, we'll introduce the rest of the speakers. You'll have 3 speakers on this session today. Myself, my name is Jay Tryon. I am the Superintendent of Community Recreation. We have Alex Roletter, who's one of our park managers, and Liz Morrell, who's our data analyst. Some of our goals today is to introduce participants to a new philosophy of community events that emphasizes the goal of connecting people through diverse neighborhoods, share our story of how we started Open Streets and what we've been doing since 2015, as well as contingency plans that we're discussing right now based off of COVID-19. In addition to those goals, there's going to be some conversations we want to interact with you throughout the day. We are recording this session, but we will be live the day of and be asking you to ask questions in the chat box, and we'll be in the chat box, answering your questions and also engaging through other conversations. So some of the things we're going to ask you to engage with us throughout the day. We'll be talking about how special events have changed based on COVID, partnerships that we've entered through this event and other special events, the potential for opening an Open Streets event in your neighborhood based on any size population, as well as how we can focus on equity on an event like this. So with that being said, we're going to get into the overview and the background of this event and give you some more information on how it started and how we got involved. So what is Open Streets 704? Open Streets is really an event that can be described in many different ways, but the most simplest way is it is an opportunity that we bring communities together by creating linear parks. We've been involved with this event since its inception in 2015. We do the event twice a year, and in order to give you a little more information, we're going to show you a quick video first. Excellent. Now that we've seen some images on our event, I want to give you a little background on how it got started and the actual movement that's gone throughout the country. So the Open Streets movement has been going on for several years. It actually started with a collaboration of an organization called 880 Cities. It's a nonprofit that's based in Canada, and their goal was to foster happy and equitable public spaces with urban street plans to be able to provide an open space and create these open streets to be able to provide movements for people to collaborate and actually come out and enjoy linear parks in a non-traditional setting. So according to a survey that was conducted in 2018 by Park and Rec staff, nearly half of the event attendees traveled to the event by method other than automobiles, and 44% of them actually spent more than 2 hours recreating and socializing in these streets. So as I mentioned, this has been going on throughout the country. We have several images that have taken place in other cities, just to give you an idea of where they've happened. And here actually is a map as well of where some of these have taken place. Since 2015, we've actually seen over 85 different cities take open streets from a planning phase to an actual implementation and be successful in many different areas. One thing that's really unique about the core values that we've created here in Mecklenburg County is they align really closely with the three pillars of NRPA. So the core values of our Open Streets team is connectivity. So the goal is to bring these programs together in a diverse neighborhood throughout Charlotte and actually change the neighborhood that we do this in, since we do it twice a year. We think that pillar is very close to conservation, since we're protecting open space, connecting people to nature, engaging communities in different practices. And the next core value of Open Streets is wellness. We do that by providing physical activity in healthy settings. The goal of Open Streets, since we're closing down the streets, is to provide an open area for people to either walk, run, bike, rollerblade, or any other means of transportation that is not traditional like a vehicle. This ties really closely with the pillar of NRPA of health and wellness, which is given to them by improving access to nourishing foods, increasing opportunities for physical activities in communities. And then lastly, the third pillar for Open Streets is equity, which ties extremely close to the NRPA pillar of social equity. So when we look at our routes, we look at the event that we're planning, the goal is to promote social equity with diversity and accessibility through all of our events. So now that you have a little background and know some information on how we do it, we're going to dive into a lot more of the details of who's involved with the process, the route selection, the event partners, and actually talk about the programming that goes into this event as well. So we have a 4-person planning committee structure. So we actually have staff that are from Mecklenburg County Park and Rec, City of Charlotte staff. We have staff that actually come from Partners for Parks as well. And then we have a steering committee that focuses on 5 different core things, and that's the route selection, budget, sponsorship, grants and partnership, and programming. And then underneath our core steering team, we have additional teams that focus on smaller areas such as marketing, volunteers, evaluation, activities, and logistics. Probably the biggest decision that we as a committee make is the route selection. And there's 6 core things that go into this route selection. So the goal of the route selection is to allow participants to imagine new possibilities for streets that may not be traditionally friendly for bikes or walking. So we do this so that people can experience different neighborhoods, different street use, as well as using our greenways to extend the use of our routes. And we do that through these criteria factors that we talk about internally. So the first and foremost is accessibility. We need all of our routes to be easily accessible from a public transportation standpoint, but also equity and available for all people to target and be available to come to. The next is visibility. So from a visibility standpoint, we really want to focus on neighborhoods and actually highlight future development, talk about minimal disruption of traffic so that we're not going and having to close down major roads on a daily basis when we run these events. I know I've touched on diversity before. It's a key factor with a lot of our selections of not just routes, but programming. So we want to look at diversity both geographically and demographically. The next is discovery. We look at targeting routes that would be maybe in a new neighborhood, a new street, to allow community members to learn about different parts of Charlotte and Mecklenburg County, as well as give them a new perception of how we can utilize space when we're talking about programming and activities. The next is proximity. One of the key factors for us as Mecklenburg County Park and Recreation is to highlight green space, parks, and greenways. So how can we do that, but also focus on streets and that use of bringing people together in a safe and fun way? And then lastly is connectivity. It's one of the core values, but it's also selected very closely when we look at our routes so that we can talk about different partners that can be involved, as well as retail that can be involved with this as well, so that we can produce a high volume of people and increase the knowledge of these events. So as we move forward and choose a route, we then look at different event partners based on where the routes are going. We have signature routes that we've chosen in past routes, and we look at future routes as well. But with that being said, we always have event partners that are involved, and that includes a variety of folks, including local small businesses. It's our goal to work with local businesses so that we can increase their awareness and the engagement we have with them and they have with our events. We work very closely with the City of Charlotte. City employees actually play a key role with staff since they have a lot of expertise working with non-vehicular transportation. Partners for Parks is the founding nonprofit organization behind this event. They help dedicate a lot of time and effort to actually help us fund for this event, as well as produce the imagery of what this can look like going around on a long year basis. And then we work closely with a lot of neighborhood associations. As we go into different neighborhoods, we want to highlight them and the work they do throughout the year to increase awareness for what they stand for, as well as work with them so that we can help them engage with new citizens. We also have corporate partnerships. This helps fund events as well as sponsorships to assist future events in the mission of our event, as well as their mission that they hold. And then there's several nonprofits that we work with throughout the years to help market and provide programs the day of. So from a funding aspect, you're probably wondering how much this costs that we put on an event twice a year. And the reality is there is not one set cost. What I did here is giving you a breakdown of a rough estimate. The events anywhere can range from $25,000 to maybe $30,000, with the biggest expense being traffic control. Our actual routes range anywhere from 3 to 4 miles. So the biggest expense is actually our Charlotte Mecklenburg police staff making sure the roads are closed for traffic and they're very safe. So that's the main expense that we have. In addition, we have smaller expenses that are covering for marketing, programming, rental equipment, medics that are always on site, signage, and volunteer supplies. From a park and rec standpoint, we have several different roles that we play in planning and then evaluating and then also implementing the route. So from the planning perspective, we train a lot of staff from other organizations on what it looks like to manage large scale events. We are used to running events on a regular basis. Some events that we've run may have, up towards to 20,000 people. So it's not a big surprise and a big challenge for us to take on that role. But some other organizations that we put in key situations to help this event run may not have ever worked in a special event. So we help train them, that we do from our volunteers to evaluations to the planning committee. We also provide one staff member at all times on the steering committee, as well as provide staff to help program along the route and operational support. We'll dive in a little bit more on operational and programming later in the slides. So now I'm going to turn it over to Alex, and he's going to talk about operations and logistics for these events.
Hello, my name is Alex Roletter, and I'm a park manager for Mecklenburg County Park and Rec. And we are going to talk about first the route locations that we have used for Open Street 704. We've had various route locations throughout the inception of this event, and they have kind of evolved around these 4 main routes: the Plaza Midwood to Noda route, our historic West End to South End, Seversville to Dilworth, and Loso to Montford. All these routes have kind of evolved a little bit over time. We've tried to tweak each route that would connect different communities along the way, but also kind of always centering around our uptown Charlotte area, which is the big focus, as Jay mentioned earlier, of using our partners in the community, the neighborhoods, the business partners, and so on and so forth to make these routes work and be a successful event. We have found that the 3 mile route is really our best route. We have done a couple 4 mile routes, and one of the problems with our 4 mile route was that there were kind of some dead spots in it. It was great for the bikers of the event, but there was some dead spots here and there because that was a very long stretch to program and have facilities for people to use. So that was kind of a hindrance of that. So we kind of scaled it back a little bit to our 3 mile route being more successful, really a great event where you have anywhere from 30 to 50,000 people show up for an event, and it's a lot to do inside of that. And so the 3 mile route's been really great. Our most popular route has by far been our Plaza, Midwood, and Nodai route. This has been a great route for us to connect the communities from one area of town to another. Goes to a very diverse geographical area. It also hits the greenways system. It hits some park locations along the way. It's been really great from that standpoint, and very successful route. Next slide, please. So day of operations. This event is unlike any other event I have ever worked as far as the day of operations. It's very strategic in how you plan it out and what you need. Starting with safety. Safety is always key at any event that you're going to put on. But you know, how with this route being basically a 3 mile park, is what you're talking about here. Safety gets very, very important in how you monitor things. Use volunteer staff to help with safety. One of the coolest things that I thought that happened was somebody came up with the idea of using an intersection of superheroes. I think they may have seen it from another Open Streets event. But these people would dress up in superhero costumes, and they would go into the intersections and help people. They would be the event ambassador. So people come from every avenue, and I say avenue literally as the road that they're going to enter from. It could be off of anywhere on the route. And so you have superheroes there basically to greet them and tell them which way things are, if they want to go certain ways. That's what the volunteer staff and those intersection superheroes were able to do, and it was really a big hit. The other part that's big with safety is coordination with local police departments. Not only do they have to have input on the route, as Jay said earlier, you're going to have to cross some major roads and some major intersections at some point in time. They have to approve the route, but they also have to help with that, which is also our biggest expense with traffic control. You have to make sure that you have enough officers on hand to handle the traffic control, especially at the major intersections. I will say that over time, we've learned that we can cut down a little bit on our police staff, somewhat with the intersection superheroes, but also making sure that you place barricades on the route at the right sections. So it's very strategic in working with the police department and finding out where we can use barricades rather than having to pay someone to be at that location. And then you can use your volunteers to help. Also coordinating with the police, even though you need an officer at each major intersection, you also can use those signal lights as your friend to help with that, to keep everybody safe. And somewhat of traffic flow always has to happen, but you want to use the light signals as much as possible rather than have an officer actually directing every car and person who comes across that intersection. And then you have to also be aware of side street issues, that whether people who live along the route may, even though they're notified beforehand that the route's coming by their house, they need to get out. So you have to have basically a route where you can safely exit a vehicle that may got stuck on the route before the event starts, or there's an emergency happen. So all that is in direct coordination with our in Mecklenburg County, Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department, and helping them, helping us plan this accordingly. The other part that you have with the police is maintain crowd control. Any event of this size, again, as I mentioned earlier, 30 to 50,000 people could be at this event. You have to maintain crowd control. We've always had great success with this. No problems have ever arose at all with the Open Streets event, but making sure that you have enough police and security staff on hand to handle the event and the number of participants that may be there. So you always want to have that presence. And really that is the biggest part with the safety of those 3 bullet points there, and finally with communication with officers. And also you need to make sure you have a direct line to the officers. We always make sure that we have with communication with radios that we can tie into with our officers. So if we need something, we don't have to call 911 or anybody else. We call directly to the officer in charge that day, and he can dispatch as he feels necessary for whatever's going on. The event operations, that is, again, very interesting because we only have an hour and a half to set up a 3-mile route. And then we only have an hour to break it down. So I would strongly suggest anybody putting on an event like this, you have to pre-stage everything you can. Especially anything that you may use a vendor for. If you're using vendors for porta johns, have them drop off the day before at least. We have been able to work with the city and use city right-of-ways to do this. I would strongly suggest that, because if there's any problems, which we did run into on our first couple of events, any problems with deliveries, then they're not showing up until the event's already started, and now you got a problem trying to work them through the crowds. So try to pre-stage anything you can. Open spaces in the parks that might be along the route, or city right-of-ways, or whatever you can do that. We also put out tents at some activity hubs, which we'll talk about in a little bit. If you're doing that and you have a contractor doing that, make sure they know the time frames, and you have to make sure that they are in and out within those time frames. And then of course you always got to have trash receptacles for any litter that may be along the route that may be generated. And so those are pretty easy to put out that between that hour and a half of setup time. And then everything else along there that you have, whether it be taking anything for any vendor that you have agreed to put on the route, or signage, all that has to be done in that hour and a half time frame. So you have to really coordinate with your staff what's going on with that. We also have fire patrol that's always patrolling the route, so that if any medical issues happen, that they're able to respond to that accordingly and keep people safe. And then, of course, at the end of the event, it's the breakdown time. Trying to get everything back to where it belongs is tough because you have to get it all broken down within that hour, collect everything, and make sure you have it all. Really important that you go over this with your staff. We do a pre-meeting, run of show meeting with our staff to make sure that happens. We have a list of equipment that we give out, and that everybody, each individual group that is out on the route, is responsible for the setup and the breakdown. So the same people who set it up are the ones who break it down, so they know that they return with what they started with, because you may have generators that are very costly out on the route to provide power for other people that are programming. So all this is very has to be coordinated, and making sure that you have a checklist with all that, making sure staff know their assignments, what areas they're going to cover, because you can't cover the entire route being this 3 miles long. So you have to make sure of that. And then if once you get all that in place and you clearly communicate to them, everything has run really smoothly for us, and we are have been really blessed with that. Next slide, please. Back to our volunteers. We use them in many ways as a setup team. They help set up our hubs. They also help us with keeping people safe that day. They deliver water out. Usually this is done in a warm climate here in Charlotte, and you want to keep everybody hydrated. So we have them delivering water out to people along the route who are working, and other volunteers as well. They help with a numerous amount of things that is just incredible to have volunteers for. It's just like their activity hubs. They man the activity hubs for us and welcome people, just like the intersection superheroes. Continually do that. They're really our ambassadors of the whole event. We kind of, as operations team, we kind of want to be in the backside of it. We don't want to be the focal point. We want our volunteers and our people who are programming along the route to be our focal point. And then at the end of all this and throughout the event, they work with our evaluation team and are able to go out and get evaluations. We evaluate these things to see what we can do better, what we can improve upon every single event. And that's something that they do for us each and every time, is taking up our evaluations, our smile count, and so on and so forth, so that we can know what we can improve upon, what people enjoyed about the event, and what they didn't like. You know, it's very important to get this feedback for us. Next slide, please. And then finally, getting into placemaking. Volunteers also help with this as well, but placemaking basically is an opportunity to remember the event, draw some cultural art to the route and to the community that is a part of this event. As I said before, along the routes, they often are tweaked and always kind of massaged a little bit, even though we have our signature route, but there's always a little bit of different route we try to take. So not every turn is the same. And this picture displayed here was an example of the piece placemaking event that happened this time with Piedmont Middle School and the Etna and Mecklenburg County. We're all partnered in this and making this successful, and that is still there to this day. And our activity host, we have 4 main zones. We have the arts and science zone, the family zone, the wellness zone, and the green zone. All these are built into the event to help identify people where they want to go, to offer a multitude of different activities, depending on what the area is kind of themed after. You know, of course, arts and science zone is music, art, and dance. Always have some live entertainment there, whether that's something that we have provided or just gotten some pop-up bands that have just set up in somebody's front yard and provided some musical entertainment there. That has happened, and that's kind of arts and science zone. Our family zone do more activities related around some athletics, maybe some teaching kids how to ride bikes. Some kids never get that opportunity, and just stuff that's more active with the community. And Park and Rec's a huge programmer in that as well. And then our wellness zone, as you can see, we do anything from cooking demonstrations, some yoga or Zumba classes. Everything about wellness is in this zone. A lot of the partners with the hospitals and other partners within the health field come out and try to teach people how to live healthy and tell them what they can do to do that. And then our green zone is about our nature. And again, another piece of that is our parks. We're into preserving nature, preserving green space, and teaching people about sustainability, because without green space, we're not going to be very sustainable in the long run. So the green zone is all about that. Our horticulture department within Park and Recreation has done a great job over the years of teaching people about community gardens and teaching them how to grow things. And so Park and Rec has been heavily involved in this area as well.
Alex, can I go ahead and add one thing about the activity host?
Sure.
So before we move over to evaluation, you know, I mentioned earlier that we have several different roles with Park and Recreation in this event. And one thing that we do for activity hosts is actually the day of the event, we have 18 recreation centers, 3 senior centers that close down. They're not open to the public that day. because we ask all of those facilities to have staff at the event and they run a program. The goal behind that is to get more engagement and actually bring awareness to our rec centers and our senior centers throughout the county. And we strategically choose programs that they will run the day of that may inhibit those folks to come to those facilities. So an example of that is we have a rec center that has a skate park, and at Open Streets, that center may do a skateboarding activity. So if you see someone across the line that's coming to the event and they're actually interested in skateboarding, they may not even know that we have a skate park. So they see that activity going on, they come and talk to our staff, we educate them on the skate park. Before you know it, they come to the skate park and now they're hooked on coming. We have several rec centers that have disc golf courses. So they may run a disc golf activity along the Open Streets route to bring awareness that, hey, at my rec center, we have disc golf. And then before you know it, those folks are coming to the rec center and playing disc golf in our parks. So it's a way that we can engage with the folks on, hey, we're out there, we have all these centers throughout the county. We're closed that day to engage more and provide more activities. So if you've ever been to any of our Open Streets events, let us know in the chat box. And if you ever took part in some of these programs, which program was your favorite? And then we'll turn it over to Liz to talk about evaluation and the impact of this event.
Hi, everybody. My name is Liz Morrell. I'm the management analyst with Mecklenburg County Park and Rec. And my role with regards to Open Streets has really been to kind of use some of my knowledge and expertise with data collection and analysis to analyze the impact. So as an event or a program, is Open Streets meeting its goals? Jay did a great job of covering, what are some of the core values of Open Streets? Equity, connectivity, wellness. Is this event, it's fun and everybody has a great time, but are we meeting some of these bigger goals? So as Alex mentioned, we rely heavily on our volunteers for our data collection. Each time we have an Open Streets event, we typically have at least a dozen volunteers who are dedicated exclusively to data collection. And they can do one of two different things. They could either circulate around the event. Typically they would be stationed at one of the activity hubs, kind of the key areas in each of the zones. But they would have a clipboard and they would have a short survey where they would go around and they would just briefly interview participants and ask them questions like, how far did you travel to get to this event today? Did you walk here? Did you drive here? Did you bike here? Is this your first event? Did you learn about any new business or new part of town or new park today? And then we collect those results and aggregate and analyze them at the conclusion of the event. And then the other thing that our volunteers do, as Alex also mentioned, is smile counters. It's really difficult to estimate attendance, as you can imagine, for an event like Open Streets. But we are interested in knowing how many of our community members are we impacting with this event. Some of the new technologies that are coming out now to look at attendance would involve things like satellite GPS or drones. Open Streets just doesn't have the funding for that. So what we do is we rely on our volunteers to take periodic counts about every hour. They would do a 5-minute count and just tally the number of smiles or people that they see, because we assume everyone's smiling. And then we would extrapolate that out using just a simple formula that the team has developed to estimate attendance. And we've kept that consistent over the years so that we can look at trends. And we've seen our attendance grow every single event. Up here on the screen, I have some key metrics from the last event that we held, which was in the fall of 2019. You can see that we estimated approximately 20,000 participants. So that's 40 to 50,000 participants per year that are participating in this event. So it's a really significant portion of our populace, and it's something that's becoming more and more well known across Mecklenburg County and the surrounding regions. Some other key metrics I've shared here, as Alex mentioned, typically 3 to 4 miles is how long the route is. 5 parks and 22 recreation centers that were featured in our last event. So as Jay mentioned, it's very important for us as Mecklenburg County Park and Recreation to make sure that in the spirit of having linear parks, that the roads are really sort of, that they are tied up with our parks, right? So that as participants are traveling along the roads, they can kind of seamlessly move in and out of parks, and also speak with staff from our recreation centers so that they come to see the role of recreation as integral in this event. 86 activity hosts participated this past fall, which was, I think, the highest number that we've had. And then 2 placemaking projects, which the placemaking projects are really cool. And they're typically, as Alex mentioned, they're both permanent and they are usually funded by a corporate sponsor. And in order to, in addition to just beautifying the built environment, they also function as a traffic calming device. I want to share some results with you from the last survey evaluation that we did at the fall 2019 event. So as I mentioned, the goal of these surveys is to find out if we're meeting our goal as a planning committee with this event. And you can see that for the most part, we are. So about 2/3 of participants said that they discovered a new local business at Open Streets. And one of our best partners in this event has been local small businesses, particularly those who are stationed along the route, who not only see an increase in revenue that day, but also can become partners in the planning process and even set up some programming of their own if they wish. 98% of those who participated do support increased municipal investment in bike, pedestrian, and recreation space infrastructure. 85% of those we interviewed plan to spend some amount of money of at least $10 at a local business along the route. More than half of the participants used a method other than their personal vehicle to get to the event. And I think this is really important because this is one number that we have seen grown since we started offering the event back in 2015. More and more people have started using micro mobility devices, bikes, walking, or even an Uber or Lyft to get to the event. Now, part of that may be that it's somewhat difficult to park near the event, but it's also a really great outcome because one of the big goals that we have is encouraging people to interact with and move through urban space using methods of transportation other than a vehicle. So we are definitely achieving that goal with this program. Lastly, about 1/4 of our participants at the last event identified as ethnic or racial minorities. This is one area that as the program evaluator for this event, I would recommend some work and an opportunity to increase our diversity. Equity is a key goal of Open Streets. The committee also prioritizes it and works very hard to engage with neighborhood associations from across the socio-demographic spectrum. I do think though, just because of the nature of where some of our routes are, they tend to be in wealthier neighborhoods. I think there's some opportunity for increasing equity. So one of the things that the committee has done in recent years towards that end was to invite representatives from the Latin American Coalition, which is a local nonprofit aimed at serving the growing Latin American community in Charlotte, to not only host an activity at the event, but also to be part of the planning committee. So really giving typically marginalized communities a voice at the table. So they're not just participating in the event, they're planning the event and they're kind of directing and having feedback into some of the important decisions such as the route location and the budget. I want to talk a little bit about lessons learned, what we've seen so far in our participation and involvement with this event. You know, at its core, Open Streets is about thinking of a new way of interacting with urban space. We want to move beyond this idea of urban space as just a space that we move through to get from one place to another. And we want to start thinking about it in terms of place. And park and recreation is such an important part of that conception of place, because what we do is we set aside places for leisure and recreation and for our citizens to just relax and interact with other citizens and with the community around them. And so as part of that, and as was referenced in the video that Jay showed at the beginning, we want to encourage those who participate in this event to not only use new transit methods, but also take new transit routes. So a lot of times when you're just driving from one part of town to the other, you would take a major arterial route. You wouldn't necessarily take a side street, but maybe if you take the side street, you would start to notice something new, a new neighborhood, a new park, or some other new aspect of the urban environment that you enjoy seeing. And that's what Open Streets is about, you know, really encouraging and directing folks to go to these new parts of the city. And more than that, Open Streets is a movement. It's not just a program that we have 2 days out of the year and, that we get geared up for and then execute. We do all those things, but it's important to understand that, this movement is something that has started small and continues to grow, and it's becoming something that is a part of our professional practice all year round. So committee meetings happen in between the events. I remember we had an event, and then literally like a week later, we had our next committee meeting, because it's like, okay, let's debrief on that one and let's start planning for the next one. And it's not just the city and the county, although we play a really critical role, it's also our partners. And so it's a true movement that is the entire Mecklenburg County, with our neighborhood association partners, our nonprofit partners, corporate partners, and then us as well, just to push people towards these goals of equity, connection, and sustainability. One of the examples that I've noticed is the growth of public art in our community and throughout Charlotte. We're starting to see it pop up more and more. And for those of you who aren't familiar with Charlotte, Charlotte is a banking city. We're a corporately influenced city. And if you go to our uptown, you see that very clearly in the landscape. So to see the influence of organic artistic movements and to see that in the urban space is really cool. And I attribute that to programs like Open Streets that help people to start see their environment a little bit differently. Now, we can't ignore the elephant in the room, which is COVID. So as I mentioned, our last event was in the fall of 2019. So that's been a year ago. It's over a year ago. So in the chat box right now, I want you to stop, take a minute and think, when was the last time that your organization held a special event of more than, say, 100 or 200 people? Type your answers in the chat box. And it's kind of sad and sobering to think about the fact that probably none of us have been able to have special events like this over the past year or 8 months due to the pandemic. And it begs the question of what is the future of events such as Open Streets? Where do we go from here with the future unsure and uncertainty and things changing around us all the time? So I want to talk a little bit about what I learned from going to some sessions at NCRPA about emerging trends in the industry, as well as where the planning team is at right now for thinking about future events. And then I just want to open it up for discussion. So based on what I learned from hearing other industry professionals at NCRPA, there are some important considerations for special events in the COVID era. The first is the introduction of potentially hybrid events. So the example would be a sports event where perhaps participants could view from their vehicles on a screen. So they're still at the event, but they're socially distanced from each other, but they're still around the other spectators. Increased safety protocols. As Alex mentioned, safety has always been an important part of our practice with Open Streets, but now safety takes on an even heightened importance as we think about protocols for just pandemic management. Things like distancing, temperature checks, contact tracing are those elements that we would have to introduce into our special events operations. And the question that I want you to think about is really, why do people attend special events? What motivates somebody to get up, leave their house, gather up their children or their spouse or their pets and get in the car and drive, or hopefully use another method of transportation to get to a special event? What is it that they're looking to get out of that experience? And how do we reproduce that in a pandemic environment? Because I think a lot of what people are trying to get is that they like to be around other people and sort of in that festival environment and just experiencing the city as part of a group. And unfortunately, because of the nature of the pandemic, we just can't offer those types of events right now. So is there anything we can do as park and recreation professionals to reproduce that experience for people safely during the COVID era? I would love to hear your comments and thoughts on that. As far as the planning committee is concerned, Open Streets confetti has been discussed and is in the planning stages for this coming year. We're still working out a lot of details on this, but the idea is that we would execute multiple small scale events across the county, and that rather than being directly responsible for the management of those events, that we would work with our partners in some of the towns and neighborhoods in various parts of the county to plan and implement those events at a smaller scale. At this point, I'm going to wrap it up. I'd like to just open up the chat box and remind you that we're here watching live our presentation and your comments, and we would love to engage with you around any of these topics in particular. Special events under a long-term COVID scenario. Where do we go from here? Partnerships across sectors and working with nonprofits and corporate agencies. The potential for similar events to Open Streets to occur in cities of different sizes. And then this topic of equity. How do we increase equitable representation of our communities at similar events? Thank you all for tuning in, and we look forward to hearing your thoughts.